Welcome to the Lift and Make Lighter podcast, sponsored by LÉVO. I'm Tom Telford. I'm here with Michael Anderson. So great to be with you.
Yeah, it's awesome. Thanks for having me, Tom.
Yeah, of course. Introduce yourself, your background, talk a little bit about your practice and what led you into being a practicing mental health clinician in Utah.
Yeah. So I'm marriage and family therapy is what I do, and I work at Utah Family Therapy in American Fork. Working mostly with parents. I do a lot of work with them, and I also work a lot with men. I do a lot of porn recovery with men as well, and that's been really fascinating and really rewarding. What led me into it? Is that what you're wondering?
Yeah.
Yeah. I actually therapy was not on the radar at all. I was working a career, and I kind of thought this was going to be like the career I was going to do for the rest of my life. But then as I did it, I was realizing I wasn't loving it as much as I thought I would. And my wife was actually a family studies major at Brigham Young University. And she was, I would come home from work, kind of not feeling jazzed about work, right? And
It was work.
It was work, yeah, exactly. And she would tell me all these things she was learning about, like marriage and raising children and things like that. And I was thinking, that's really interesting. And more, I just started realizing that what she's talking about is the stuff that I want to be learning about. And so we talked a lot and decided we had saved up a bunch of money to put on a down payment on a house. We were so excited. And then we're like, shoot, we've got to go back to school. And so all that money went back to school. And
Good for you.
Yeah. It was.
You're a saver?
Yeah, it was. And we felt so proud of that. And then just seeing it like disappear, through education.
Totally.
But it was so worth it. And we went back to school, decided to do marriage and family therapy, and just haven't looked back since. It's been really cool.
Was at the Y too?
No, actually, it was at UVU.
Okay.
Yeah, they had just started a marriage and family therapy program.
Yeah, the other white meat.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so I went back to UVU. It was really great because there's a lot more balance. Because I could still work part-time at their program.
That's awesome.
And stuff. So
you have your spouse to blame for getting you into this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Totally. Let's talk trauma in just a minute.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. As long as you help me process it, man, I'm good. Yeah.
Tell us about your wife.
Yeah.
Your kids.
Yeah. Wife.
You're
kids.
a LinkedIn, famous guy. So all of these things, I feel like I know you, but only through LinkedIn.
Such a goof. My wife is Michelle, and she's incredible. So my name's Michael. Her name's Michelle. So it's very easy to remember who we are. Just remember one name. You remember the other. She's incredible. She's a family studies certified family educator. She's also a trained doula, which is really cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
I have a couple kids that were, birthed through doula, coaching. So.
Oh, for real?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible.
That's cool.
Yeah. That we have 3 kids, and our second was accidentally born at home. And that's what started her journey. It's like her and I just delivered our second son.
Wow.
Because we had to, like she wasn't going to make it to the hospital. And she's like, oh my gosh, I can do this. I could totally teach people how to do this. And so that's what started her.
That's amazing.
Journey. Yeah, it's really cool. So we've got 3 kids. We've got our oldest is Manning. Then he's 5, and he just started kindergarten. So I'm processing all that with the oldest going to school finally. And then our 3-year-old's Parker, and he was born at home. And then our youngest is NJ, and she's a little over a year old. Cool. So yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, they're just awesome.
And Michelle is a runner because I saw that as well.
Yeah.
So this is this a thing in the family? Running, fitness?
So her and I both really like to run. We try and do one race a year together. And so we'll sign up for it and kind of train for it, whether that's a half. We love the half marathon distance. It's like perfect. If you've got a busy schedule and can't dedicate hours and hours and hours to running, like training for half marathon's perfect. And so with busy life and 3 kids, we try and do at least 1 or 2 events a year together. Yeah.
Is the running thing part of your Oregon roots?
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you a duck at heart?
A duck at heart. I don't know if they would accept me, I don't know if, but I love running. I would love to go visit Nike up there.
Yeah.
And I was telling him before we started recording, lived up in Oregon for a couple years, and But I actually didn't get into running until later in life. I was probably 22 or so.
Yeah.
I really started getting into it. So
Very
it's been
cool.
really fun. Yeah.
So you are a Nike guy, not an Adidas guy?
Man, it just depends on what direction you want this podcast to go. Because I could talk about this for the rest of the thing. I go back and forth. I probably lean towards Nike over Adidas.
Okay.
But I'm actually, if running, I'm actually a Saucony guy.
Yeah.
over
Interesting.
everything. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. That's what I run in. So
Well, we could spend an hour just on running.
yeah,
but,
we could.
You know, we'll move on, but I'm interested to know, you spoke about your education journey.
Yeah.
What led you into the Y? I mean, was it,
Yeah.
I mean, because you grew up in Oregon. So what brought you here? Was it, LDS roots? Was it family, friends?
Yeah. So definitely. Yep. LDS roots, wanted to go to BYU for an undergrad. And again, I didn't know, I was not even, I didn't get my undergrad anything close to therapy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wanted to come up here, and my older siblings had gone up here, and just wanted that experience. I'd heard amazing things about Utah in general.
Yeah.
Now I'm from Texas, which I don't know if you've ever been to Texas.
I have.
You have? Okay.
Oh yeah. Big hat, no cattle.
Yeah. That's exactly. That was me. And I actually love growing up in Texas, but it's just very flat.
Yeah.
And I come to Utah, and you just see the mountains and the big Y in the mountains, and I just fell in love. I was like, I love this place. And so
That's cool.
yeah.
Have you ever slid down the hill yet on skis?
It's funny. It's funny. I've done cross country skiing, which people always tell me that's the worst part about skiing. It's just the walking with skis, and there's like, that is not.
That's pretty good description.
Yeah.
I mean,
so I haven't actually done the downhill skiing. I think I've never had much of an interest in snow sports. Again, probably just from growing up in Texas.
Yeah.
So, but we hit the trail. Like my wife and I love to trail run. We hit the trails all the time and love to be outside a lot. So.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, take us into, obviously it sounds like from her just describing what's going on, at school, you just thought, man, I really want to do this. Say more about that. Just, was it because you were intrigued about the relationships? Were you intrigued about, what was going on now being a newlywed? Maybe you just saw like, hey, this stuff is important. It's meaningful.
Yeah. I wonder if it's more of the second, right? So my wife and I got married, and a month and a half into marriage, we unexpectedly got pregnant with our first kid. We weren't planning on it, but a month and a half into marriage, and you're having getting ready to have your first kid. I mean, it changed so much for us, right? I mean, of course, started getting so interested in marriage dynamics, family dynamics. How do you strengthen? We were still getting to know each other, right? And all of a sudden, like, we're going through major changes, and our life is no longer our own. And so we were having marital conflict and feeling disconnected and trying to navigate it. And so I think that was had to have been a major influence, right? Of just, man, how do you build a strong marriage, right? And how do you build an intentional family? And so I think that had to be a really big, a big factor.
Well, you mentioned you had older siblings, so I'm assuming you had multiple siblings in your family, grew up, with siblings and seeing, what a marriage may or may not look like depending on that experience, but were those also factors that you brought into it? Just gave you some of your context to how hard it is maybe, to raise a family?
Yeah, it 100%. And I think too, maybe even more so, it was probably as I got to learn, I was learning more and more about family dynamics, about trauma, about the effects of trauma. That was actually a really interesting experience for me to then retroactively reflect back on my growing up experience. Because you have one lens growing up. I was talking with someone the other day, and they were telling me about, I just thought my family was one way growing up, and now it's like, it's so hard to like see that things aren't perfect. Things are actually really hard. And we were talking how it's almost like its own unique grieving process to think to have one idea about your family growing up, and then to grow up and realize things are a lot more different than you realized, right?
Maybe there's not benevolence in family.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a weird grieving process. And I think early on, that was a very interesting experience for me as I started schooling and learning more about these things. So,
Yeah, when you start to reflect back on your own family of origin, I think they call it,
Yeah.
and just representing that, well, maybe, I'm a product of a system and surroundings and just how things were navigated and, how parents dealt with things. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And honestly, I'd be remiss to not say, my parents I had amazing parents, right? Like I was very fortunate to have a really great upbringing. And even still, there are things looking back that I know I was affected by just being a part of a system, like you said, right? With so many relationships going back and forth. And so that just became so fascinating to me to start to explore more.
Where do you land?
I'm the youngest of 7.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, we could get into all that, but there's dynamics there that have.
No, you're perfect.
I get it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Everyone held you and said, "Oh, you're cute and you're adorable," and and you thought you were perfect, and then you got married.
I'm the youngest of 7, which means I think I'm perfect and I have crippling insecurity all at the same time. So, it's been a lot to process through with that.
Yeah, I'm the baby of 5, so I get
okay. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, you get it.
Context, right, of just what you bring, to a marriage and a relationship. So
for sure.
So you went all the way through, becoming a marriage and family therapist at UVU. And where did you go from there? Did you have to do internship time and that's where you landed here? Did you begin here?
Yeah. So fortunately, yes, I actually began here and then have just really developed a great relationship with the owner of the clinic. And he's been so supportive of me like creating content on LinkedIn and starting my own coaching business and things. And so he's just been super supportive. It's been a really great partnership there. Started early on in schooling. I worked a ton with couples. Really loved that. And then I think just as I started having more kids and became more and more fascinated in parenting dynamics, and I started learning about trauma and trauma healing and how do you help somebody through that process. My interest started pivoting more towards kind of the individual work with a parent saying, hey, I've got this stuff that's keeping me from connecting with my kid and I just want to process through that. I need to work through this. And that's where I've kind of landed so far right now. And I've been loving it.
Let's dive more into that because I think that this is something that, we often, if you're in the mental health space, you often hear, well, I'm going to take my child to therapy. I'm going to, they have a problem, type of a thing. And in reality, we're all a product of a system or an environment. Yeah. And by the way, this is not a segment to shame parents like, hey, it's, you're the problem in the household. Right. But talk more about that oftentimes that what's going on in a child's life, and some of the symptoms that may be, showing up in a teenager's life or a child's life, there is some implication on the broader system and how that is involved in what symptomatic things are happening with the child.
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, first off, research is just showing that a lot of to a large extent, anxiety and depression in teenagers can be linked to the quality of relationship with their parents. And obviously there are other factors there, right? Yeah. But there's enough research showing that to where it's always worth exploring. Okay, what's happening in that parent-child dynamic because of attachment systems, right? I'm guessing with a wife who's an LMFT, you're familiar with attachment science. And
I am, but describe it more because it's significant for just listeners to know. Yeah, what that actually is. I mean, we tend to think, well, if they're a child and a parent relationship, there's just a bond there, but that's maybe that's just oversimplified. That there's a lot more that goes on to bonding than just the fact that you happen to be the parent.
Right. Totally. Yeah. So the idea, if it's okay, I'll kind of explain attachment and then can I give an example from a client where I think this played out just to answer your question. So the idea of attachment is that as humans, we're wired to bond. We are bonding creatures. Like just as much as we need air, shelter, food, water, we also need to feel connected. And I'm a firm believer that the heart of all healing is connection. Whether that's connection with yourself or connection with other people, usually you need both, right? And so the most important relationship for a child, obviously, is the bond between them and their parents. And it's their parents is how it's their interactions with their parents is how their brain learns how to conceptualize their world, right? It's how their brain learns to distinguish if I'm worth getting my needs met, right? If I'm safe, if I'm secure. And so, so a child's brain is just kind of always filtering experiences, especially through the relationship with their parent of, hey, are my needs going to be met with this individual? And then science just shows, research shows that what their brain learns about the answers to those questions, their brain takes that with them throughout their life, right? It kind of starts to become the lens. They start to look at other relationships with people. Where do I fit in the grand scheme of things based off of the signals and the messages I got from my parents, right? And then attachment science also shows that we have a chance to heal that through our marriage relationships as well, right? With kind of parenting relationships and our romantic relationships are the two, from an attachment perspective, are the two most important in that. So hopefully that's a quick enough, succinct enough version of attachment.
Say just a little bit more. What is at the core of attachment? I mean, just because of my own reading and kind of understanding, I'm intrigued to know what goes on chemically, maybe is the right question.
Yeah.
At the core of attachment. So if you're the dad and I'm the son, and I'm thinking, I stink as a father. Like, how can I not connect with my child? What is not happening there? What's chemically not occurring? Between the two.
Like on a chemical level, like what's not, what chemicals aren't firing.
Your brain and my brain.
Yeah.
What needs to occur in order for attachment to occur?
Yeah.
I mean, different than romantically, right?
Sure.
Like, I know that I can hold hands and kiss my wife, and like there's this physical connection, emotional things that are going to go on. But in a parent and child relationship, what does that look like?
Yeah. So let me give you a couple different perspectives there with that answer. So again, I'm going to say they've done research. When I say they, I just mean people smarter than me that I get to learn from. They've done research that shows that the brain lights up in a very similar way to if you're experiencing physical pain, your brain lights up a certain way. And research has shown that when you're experiencing emotional pain, your brain lights up in almost the exact same way. Like the same exact systems light up, whether it's physical pain or emotional pain. Bottom line, what that means is the brain just wants to avoid pain, and emotional pain hurts just as much as physical pain. And emotional pain elicits the same type of midbrain fight or flight reaction that physical pain does. And so when on a chemical level, right? When a parent and a child relationship is such that there's disconnection happening, children can enter a fight or flight response in which their brain is saying, how do we survive this? What are the best strategies to survive this? And that's when a brain will learn how to do behaviors that are really good for survival, but not super good for finding connection, right?
Yeah.
And on the flip side, what a brain is looking for, a brain wants to feel safe, a brain wants to feel secure, and a brain wants to feel wanted. That's what we want as humans. Those are the things we want. And so when those things are happening on a chemical level, really powerful chemicals are flowing through our body. There's oxytocin, which is the bonding hormone. People call it the cuddle hormone, right? Which for fathers out there, I found this really interesting. I was just reading about this, that oxytocin gets released between fathers and children. Oxytocin gets released much more through play than through cuddling, which I thought was really interesting. So parents playing with their kids and like wrestling and throwing them around and yelling and screaming, like all that's just like really bonding. Anyway, that's cool. And then, but also, I mean, endorphins are released, right? These like natural painkillers in a child's brain. Serotonin is regulated. I mean, all of these wellness chemicals are released through a child and a parent interacting in such a way that the child feels safe, secure, and wanted, right? It's just really powerful.
Yeah. I set you up that way because I wanted to talk about the happy chemicals.
Yeah.
Because as you are doing what you're doing with people, I think that oftentimes people want this kind of, because I'm married to a therapist, I know this.
Yeah.
I joke with my wife, like, well, you turn on your Jedi, like, give me some Jedi mind tricks,
Yeah. Yeah.
But in reality, it's pretty simple stuff. Just play with your kids, hug your kid.
Yeah.
Those simple things there are chemicals being released that you described that are the bonding things, you know? So I think that it's simpler at times than we may make it. Like, oh, I got to come up with these, crazy ways. But everybody kind of knows how to play and
totally.
hug your kid. And
yeah. And I think just as just one last add on to that, I think that's so important, especially because oftentimes society sends messages of emotions make you weak, right? To get emotional is, you just got to suppress and repress, right? And that happens a lot with children. And so this experience that they should be having with their parents, right? Of being able to come to them with distressing emotions and having their parents be open and ready to help them process it, to help that cascade of chemicals be released, right? If it doesn't happen, then the brain is going to try and find some other way to get them, right? Yeah. And I think that's why you see pornography use so high among young boys, especially, right? Mm-hmm. And addictive behaviors and numbing and anything. It's just our brain wants that chemical experience so badly.
Yeah.
So
coping.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you cope with just, life stressors, and how do you deal with that? And obviously the brain is going to search for those chemicals in one way or another.
Right.
That's what it kind of is hungering for. You alluded to maybe having an example of a client, who.
Yeah. Yeah. So this was a really interesting client. So, a parent came with, I think, their 15-year-old son or something, and they were having lots of battles over tech issues. Like the son was always on his phone, and the mom was like, I just don't know how to get him off his phone, and he just seems really addicted. And she's like, if you could just please help him to not need his phone so much anymore, that would mean everything. And so I was working with him and I was working with her, and I started noticing this dynamic in their relationship where, the mom, who of course for every good reason is like, I don't want my son addicted to his phone, she's experiencing intense anxiety. And that anxiety was causing her to engage in actually very self-protective behaviors, right? She would, if you watch them interact, she would, engage in a lot of like shaming behaviors, right? Like, I don't know what's wrong with him. Like, he's like in the room, right? And I don't know what's wrong with him, and he just doesn't listen, and everything. And you can just see how the impact of what she was saying was having.
He's in the room while she's saying
these things, yeah. Right? And I'm just like watching this dynamic, and for a few sessions, I really tried to help them see, like, guys, it's not about the tech. It's about your guys' relationship. Let's see if we can help heal this, how you guys interact with each other. But it just wasn't really working. And so finally one day I just said to her, I was like, I just got to be as bold. I just got to be straightforward with her. Right. And she ended up firing me after this, but I said,
so it worked.
Yeah, it worked really well.
Yeah.
I said, she's, again, in one of those sessions, she's like, help him get off his phone. Like, I don't know what to do with him. And he would like try and open up, and she would just be like, that doesn't make any sense what you're saying, because, and she would like just shoot him down. And so finally I said, like, listen, Mom, I totally understand what you're wanting to do here. You have to get this. The issue here isn't how do we get your son to stop using his phone. The issue here is, how do we help you guys talk about this in such a way that in 20 years from now, he still wants to use his phone and call you and talk to you. And she's kind of like did this really nervous laughter, and we ended the session, and she called a couple days later and said they found a different therapist. But I just really believe that's the key here, is kind of what you referenced. Sometimes we overcomplicate parenting, which I do all the time. We can spend a whole hour if you want to just talking about the times I just mess up. But what we're really looking for is connection, because that's what heals. Anyway, so
yeah. So much to double click on right here,
sure.
With you. But I mean, we just, we had lunch, with our team a half hour ago. Yeah. The conversation was, how do you be okay losing a battle to win the war.
Yeah.
And the winning the war really is, how do you maintain long-term relationships with your children so that they want to still be in your life?
Totally.
You know, as opposed to you're trying to correct the behavior in the short term because you're nervous of what the outcome would be if they stay addicted to their phone.
Exactly.
And you're fighting and you're fighting. And so the phone really is going to drive a wedge into the relationship. And eventually he's going to stay addicted to the phone, but now he's gone. You can't even talk to him anymore. He doesn't want to talk to you.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So how often does that occur? You know, just in terms of what
Did I get fired by clients? A lot. Almost every one of them at some point. Just say, I'm done with you.
Yeah, something tells me that, I don't know, maybe that was some truth serum, you know, that she wasn't really ready to face yet. You know, there was something going on there.
Sure.
She, you know, I'm curious, when you now maybe step back and the 30,000 foot view in that situation, was she herself hungering for connection?
100%.
She was, I mean, sounds horrible. Was she ticked off or, you know, jealous of the phone? The phone was getting the attention from him versus she, I mean, what was going on there in her own insecurity? Was it just...
Yeah. You know, it's obviously it's impossible to say for sure. Right. But if I look at patterns, right. She was looking for connection. I mean, parents want to feel bonded to their kids just as much as a child wants to feel bonded to their parents, right?
Yeah.
And so oftentimes, whether it's this situation or I can't say how many couples I've worked with where, you know, one partner's like, I don't know why I get so mad and I just criticize so much, right? The underneath criticism and anger, I have always found, it's not just me, like this is based off attachment science, and then I've just seen it play out over time and time again. Underneath anger and criticism is always sadness. But people don't know what to do with sadness. But people know what to do with anger, right? Anger gives them a sense of power.
Totally.
And so they go to anger. But underneath it is sadness. And this mom was so sad that she couldn't figure out how to keep her son close to her. And so what we were trying to do is help her realize that if she can actually work on that regulation piece, that when that anxiety triggers that shaming and that anger, and help her stay in that sadness and help her communicate from that place rather than this place of anger, then she'd actually get the connection that she's wanting. But she wasn't ready to go there. Hopefully someday she is. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's probably one of the hardest moments, you know, in a therapeutic alliance of someone kind of not being willing to address it yet. And the answer was, well, therapist has got to go because you know?
I just wanted you to fix my son, you know, and I don't want to do any of this like deeper stuff. Just get the tech to go.
Yeah. Fascinating. When you talk through that situation, it seems like that the child was trying to figure out their own coping, right?
Yeah.
Anxious parent, not necessarily feeling safe.
Yeah.
You know, they're getting after me and I'm feeling bad about my inability to stay off the phone. So, you know, they're looking for coping mechanism, you know, it sounds like in their own life, you know, to deal with anxiousness and stress.
Yeah.
You alluded just a minute ago to they're gonna pivot somewhere.
Yeah.
So you take that 15-year-old boy now, in that type of an environment where it's kind of an anxious environment, are they more likely to find themselves seeking out things like pornography or other ways of getting the dopamine hit, gaming, scrolling all the time? You know, I mean, is that fairly common?
You know, it's interesting. We live in a world where those things just kind of find you, right? And so I think what probably happens more often is, you know, you have a video game industry that's, I don't think there's anything wrong with video games, but there's obviously their target market is kids, right? Yeah. At least that's a subset of their target market, right?
Sure.
And so kids will find ads for video games that are stimulating and fun and get this artificial chemical process happening. I say artificial just because it's not coming from the way nature intended us to get it, right? Through actual real connection, right? You have a pornography industry that one I do believe is evil, right? And is targeting children. Like they're targeting children. And so a kid, you know, I was working with a client who always felt not good enough. He grew up, he had a father who was his father hadn't worked on his own anger. And so his anger would come out very, very easily. And often on his anger would get taken out on his son. And then I remember this client was telling me like, yeah, I just always felt not good enough. And it would never measure up. And I just didn't ever feel accepted by him. And then he's 12 years old and he's on his computer and all of a sudden a pornographic image shows up. He wasn't searching it, but all of a sudden a chemical reaction's happening that should have been happening through real connection with his parents. And his brain's like, oh, this is how we get it. Got it.
Yeah.
Let me file that away and let's make sure we come back to this strategy.
Yeah.
I think that's how it happens more often.
I want to go back and again.
Yeah.
I want you to describe it again, because I think that there is a bit of a stigma and a cultural thing going on that, that the beginning of pornography is that the individual is seeking it out.
Right.
And that there's, I don't know, maybe that there's like this negative curiosity that's going on, that they seek it out, when in reality it is possible that the lack of happy chemicals and feel-good chemicals don't exist. And so when it does happen, not even on purpose, but when it does happen, all of a sudden, the brain is going to have a chemical response to it.
Yes.
So
totally.
I mean, I say that just because I think oftentimes parents get so nervous and they're concerned that, no, there was something in my kid that sought it out.
Yeah.
He was looking for bad stuff.
Totally.
Or my kid is bad and he's going to be a pedophile. Like all of that stuff versus may not necessarily be the case. So what do you see clinically of how that, maybe that process plays out? Yeah.
So, I mean, just going off of what you're saying, I think that is the biggest worry of parents, right? Is their anxiety goes up because sexuality in general, there's a lot of shame baggage over sexuality in general, right? And so our parents have this big fear of like, oh no, like I hope my kid never sees pornography, because of all the messages, all the narratives that our brain has put over what pornography means, which aren't true, by the way, right? But these narratives of they're perverted, right? They're going to be slaves. They're going to do illegal things, right? Because of it. All these like shame-based, fear-based narratives that aren't true. I think it's so important to unpack the fact that what's happening here, first off, pornography 99% of the time isn't even about sex. It's about a lack of connection in someone's life. And bonding with another human is a healing process for a human. Whether that's bonding child-parent, whether that's bonding hugging and kissing, whether that's bonding through sex, that's healing to the human brain. That's a healing process. And so if a child doesn't have connection in their life and all of a sudden they get targeted, or their brain says like, hey, there is an avenue through like sexuality that like maybe we could explore this. People are so quick to jump onto the shame of like, oh my gosh, like that is so gross. But really like we're looking for connection.
Yeah.
And I think we need to understand that. And I think it's so important for parents to understand, because when you first find out that your kid sees pornography, right? If they come to you, if you see it on their phone, that moment is one of the most important moments in that relationship with your child, right? Is anxiety going to take over and shame? And then your kid will download all of that and realize, oh my gosh, I'm doing something really bad. But yet I can't explain the fact that my brain really likes it.
Yeah.
So I must be bad.
I felt healing.
Yeah.
So I'm being told I'm bad by people who are, my safest place on the earth.
Exactly.
And yet my brain says, no, you're good.
You're good. Like this is really good, because your brain's right. Like sex is really good. And for a little child brain can't distinguish the fact that between sex and an evil industry that targeted them, right? And so if a parent can manage their own anxiety and just, I don't know if this is even getting to the question that you'd asked, but just make that a very connecting experience with their kid and normalize everything and show them love and real connection. That's one of the greatest safeguards to compulsivity down the road.
Yeah. I think even hearing you describe it, I want you to just maybe share a little bit more. Why is connection the missing thing to where other addictions can enter and take over that? I mean, even my own brain hears it at times and I'm like, okay, so if I don't have connection with my children or other humans, why am I apt to be, to chase some other chemical, or whether it's pornography or drugs or something else. Why is that?
Just make sure I understand your connection. Why are we so prone to, if connection is not happening, to pivot and turn towards other sources for it? It's because other sources don't require any vulnerability. Pornography requires zero vulnerability. To actually be in a state of not having connection, and to then, to ask a kid to do this, child to do this would be wild, right? But to be in a state of no connection, and to have the courage and the vulnerability to go to your parent, or to go to your spouse, or to go to your friends and say, I'm hurting. I'm really hurting, and I need you. That, first of all, that type of vulnerability has a stigma against it. People say, like, repress what you're feeling. Like, don't be weak or whatever, right? Or vulnerability, it's too scary. That's what needs to happen, but it's so vulnerable. And especially if we're talking about if a child's sitting there and is like, I don't feel connected to my parents at all, it doesn't feel safe. I can finally just feel safe here with this screen that doesn't judge me and doesn't think I'm gross and doesn't think I'm annoying or a burden or anything. I think that's why we do it, is because we pivot to other things because there's no vulnerability required.
Yeah. But in circumstances, and you're just describing, thinking of like my own children or me as a child, I wouldn't have even known to be that intentional about doing it.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, it's happening at a subconscious level.
Exactly.
Even as an adult, you don't necessarily move throughout your day and be like, well, I'm sure lacking connection today. Porn sounds good. Let's dial it up.
Yep.
And so it really lives in this subconscious way, right? And so even as we started and you described that the human brain hungers for connection, I think a lot of people are like, I can go ride my bike for 8 hours, see no one, talk to the sky and be stoked. You know?
Totally.
And I think a lot of people they can kind of be a loner, maybe, antisocial and be okay. But in all of those circumstances where I find myself alone and I'm still okay, I'm still getting serotonin. I'm outside.
Yeah.
I'm reading something. I'm being stimulated in my mind another way.
Yeah.
And so that's where being alone, or that's just my personality to not have a bunch of friends. Those are the excuses that we put up as humans, where it's like, well, I don't need that. But in reality, your brain's getting it in other ways.
Yeah.
So it doesn't always have to be like, hey, I'm the student body president and I'm good,
Yeah.
So what are the other ways that people get that connection instead of being the life of the party?
I'm so glad you brought this up, because I am a very proud introvert. Like my wife would love to go to parties, and I'm like, why? Why would we ever do that? That sounds like a terrible idea.
But I think we can run together, my friend.
Yeah. Or it's seriously, like, as someone who's just like safeguards my alone, I love my alone time.
Yeah.
So I personally believe there are two levels of connection. There's connection with others, and there's connection with self. If there's any suffering in life, it's because one or both of those levels of connection are not happening. And so I believe that connection with self is just as important as connection with other people. How many people do you know that actually connection with others becomes a coping mechanism to never have to go inside and deal with what's happening inside of them, right?
Yeah.
There's like, I always have to be talking with people. I gotta be busy because they're so scared of what's happening inside. And so I think, we've been given this earth with a sun that activates, right? Wellness, serotonin, right?
Totally.
With nature that activates all those same principles, and we've been given this environment to go and actually have connection with self and be with self in those types of moments that I think are so powerful and needed and can't be overlooked. That's in it. And in fact, I think that's one of the first steps of healing trauma, is learning how to finally connect with yourself, whether that's through quiet moments or that's going outside and just being with you, right? And so that's my perspective on that question. I love that you brought that up.
I love it to just hear you describe it. Speaking of running, one of my favorite ultra runners that's out there right now, this woman who's just like,
According to Walter?
Yeah,
she's insane.
I listened to a podcast with her, and she was asked in the interview a little bit about, you're out there for whatever, 20 hours running by yourself.
Yeah.
How aren't you bored? And her description actually almost, I was in tears hearing her describe it. And she said, I'm in relationships. I have friends, I have, partners, but she's like, the most intimate moment I've ever experienced was when I was out running through the forest alone. She's like, that sounds strange. I'm not talking about a sexual intimate moment. I'm talking about the intimate moment where I truly get to communicating and having this internal dialogue with self.
Yeah.
And it blew me away. I was like, wait, someone's giving me the permission to be alone a lot.
Yeah.
And I find that, I find there are moments where I can be on my bike riding for hours and on end. People, my wife, who's very social.
Yeah.
Like, what, are you so bored? And
right.
Like, I talk to myself. Taylor Swift was in my ear.
Yeah.
Willie Nelson. I'm like, no, I was out with my buddies.
Taylor, and Willie, that's a good combination.
It's
that's
unreal.
Good, yeah.
Yeah. The three of us together are so strong, can ride anywhere. But I love that thought and idea of just connection doesn't necessarily mean, and I bring it up because kids are going to hear this.
Yeah.
He's going to post it on social media and kids hear like, well, the opposite of like addiction is connection.
Yeah.
And I have no friends.
Right.
I'm not the life of the party.
Totally.
I literally get anxious and like distraught if I have to go connect with people.
Yeah.
So am I doomed the rest of my life?
Right.
And so hearing you describe that connection is with self too.
100%.
Safe too.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's brilliant.
You got to have both. Yeah. Yeah.
Pivot a little bit and talk about trauma.
Sure.
Describe trauma. We often hear it. It's like, you don't have to have served in Vietnam to have trauma.
Yeah.
Like, what is the broad definition? And then tie that into this discussion about connection.
Yeah. So I think the most broad and simple definition of trauma is any experience that has not been fully processed by your brain. And therefore it's affecting your present moment, or it's affecting in the way you show up presently, currently. Which, when you apply that definition, you start to realize that trauma isn't limited to like going off to war, right? It's not limited to being abused in terrible ways. And these are terrible things that can cause trauma, right? And this is an important distinction. Trauma is not the event. Trauma is the unprocessed. Trauma is the fact that hasn't been processed yet by the brain, right? And so any event, and whether that was because just in the moment you didn't have the resources to really process what was going on, maybe you're so young, right? Or maybe it's just so overtly distressing that a key indicator, according to research, of what actually makes something traumatizing to the brain is a sense of powerlessness. So if in that moment you had a sense of powerlessness to really like handle what was going on, but it's any experience that wasn't processed by your brain. And so what your brain does is it forms behaviors implicitly. Like, you don't choose this consciously. Implicitly, it chooses, implicitly it creates these protective behaviors to try and not have to face the trauma that hasn't been processed yet in the brain. The brain kind of like shoves it deep, far away as it can, right?
Yeah.
And tries to create these protective behaviors that make sure we don't have to deal with the trauma, right? And so how this applies, right? So one thing I love to do with parents is work with them and help them realize from this really compassionate place that actually what's happening here with your relationship with your kid is not that your kid necessarily needs to change, but that there's protective behaviors you're engaging in that are disconnecting you from your child, right?
Yeah.
Right. And these behaviors can be people-pleasing behaviors. They can be a lack of boundary setting, but lack of boundary holding, right? High reactivity, right? These behaviors that sometimes we wonder, why am I doing this? I'm a grown adult. Like, why am I acting like a 14-year-old or a 7-year-old? Well, it's because there's literally a part of you neurologically that's frozen in time because of trauma that is 8 and is protecting yourself in that moment, right? And so we can go in any direction that you want to from there, but that's kind of an overview, kind of a broad view of that.
No, I love that. That past trauma is, in my head, when I hear it described, it's a stuck spot.
Yeah.
Whether or not you see it or not, or just subconsciously, it's manifesting itself in other behaviors or, the way that you react to situations today, but it's something in your past,
Yeah.
I mean, I've gone through some of the DBT and some of these other things for my own past trauma.
Yeah. Good for you.
And, in sitting with my therapist and going through some of these things, to be honest, I was like, what?
Yeah.
How are you going to take me back to then?
Yeah.
And I did. And I was able to go back and address it. And I know that it worked today. What's interesting is how do you know if it worked?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the answer is that I'm not in the stuck place.
Yeah.
If I go to the memories and I now am in situations that bring it up, I don't have the same reactions. It's kind of fascinating to think that through, that past trauma can be addressed and, that people can move through that. And I'm not saying DBT there's a lot of different ways and modalities to get there.
Totally.
But I like the description of just kind of hearing how broad trauma is.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be abuse or some crazy car wreck, that it can be, as simple as just unaddressed things, from the past that were challenging. So, to close it off, just freestyle a little bit, whether that's a recent client or scenario that you've worked through. But the longer that you do this and the longer you kind of sit with people who are stuck or in challenging spots, have you built in kind of this internal, dialogue of what you would want every human to know, from your perspective, of a mental health professional?
Yeah. Yeah. Man, that's such a good question. So, I think a couple of thoughts that come to mind, right? We've talked a lot about connection. That's like the biggest thing is I just really feel like the heart of all healing is connection with self, connection with others, right? I think another really important, powerful thing is, I talk to clients all the time how there's a difference between pain and suffering. Pain happens as a result of being human. Like, it is very human to feel happy. It's also very human to feel sad. It's very human to feel excited. It's also very human to feel terrified. It's very human to feel content. It's also very human to feel jealous, embarrassed. Anything like it is human to feel pain. Suffering, on the other hand, is all the things we do to try and avoid our pain. I was talking with a teenager. I was talking with a kid who has a lot of social anxiety. And I said, I bet you something. He goes, what? He's like, I bet you, yes, feeling socially anxious hurts. But what has hurt more is the fact that you haven't been able to go and experience connection with people. Like, the anxiety has pulled you away from like living your life in the way that you want to live it, right? Your response to the anxiety, right? And he's like, yeah, that's true. I really do feel like so much of the human experience is a lot of people come into therapy and they say, I want you to make my pain go away, essentially, right? Stop making me, I don't want to be sad anymore. I don't want to be depressed. I don't want to be anxious. I don't want to compare myself. I don't want negative thoughts anymore. Take away my pain. And actually, one of the biggest mindset shifts that any therapist is trying to help their client shift into. And if the shift doesn't happen, then therapy won't be effective. The shift is actually, you're asking the wrong question. You're saying you want your pain to go away, but really what you need is to learn how to decrease your suffering. It's learn how to become much more aware of what are you doing in attempts to avoid your pain that's actually just causing way more hurt in your life, right? And how do you learn to actually be kind to these parts of yourself that are in pain? You spent so much of your life avoiding the parts of you that are in pain, of dismissing them, hating them, but actually we're going to take you on a journey of learning how to get to know each of those parts of you and learn how to love those parts of you. And I think that's a crucial thing that everyone needs to understand.
Yeah.
We'd have a lot less suffering.
Mic drop on that one. That's so good.
These seem like expensive mics. I won't drop them. But,
You could on that point.
Oh, okay.
I think that's so brilliant just for people to hear.
Yeah.
That it's it's really how you respond to the pain
Yeah.
instead of trying to ignore it or push it away or,
Yeah, that's what's causing all the suffering, right?
Yeah.
The pain doesn't hurt nearly as bad. Like getting to know the part of you that's sad, you'd actually learn how to really love that part of you, right? Yeah.
Brilliant. Michael, you're awesome.
You're awesome. This
Thank
has been
you
awesome.
for being in the industry. Thank you for, all you're doing to lift and make lighter people's lives. I mean, that's so impactful. And because I'm married to a mental health professional and I see, what goes on behind the scenes, I think it's an amazing profession. And, if you don't hear it enough, thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you. That really does mean a lot. This has been really cool. I appreciate you having me on, man.
Yeah, cool. Thanks again.
Yeah, for sure.